In the 1980s, one man sat at the center of Mexico's drug world like a banker in a war zone, quiet, suited, protected by badges as much as gunmen. Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo wasn't just moving marijuana and cocaine. He was building a system, a centralized plaza model, dividing territory and assigning corridors, that would later let rival crews operate like franchises, turning whole border cities into revenue streams. Then came a single kidnapping that detonated everything. DEA agent Enrique "Kiki" Camarena abducted on February 7, 1985, as he left the US consulate in Guadalajara. The fallout launched a manhunt that rewired US-Mexico drug enforcement and cracked open Felix Gallardo's circle. Today, the so-called Godfather is still alive, and later, reporting still described him as incarcerated, despite a judge granting him house arrest on health grounds in 2022 and prosecutors challenging the move. The architect is still alive, but the machine he helped design never stopped. To understand Felix Gallardo, you have to picture Mexico's underworld before cartels became a household word. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, trafficking was still stitched together by smugglers, crooked cops, and political favors. More network than army. The people who lasted weren't always the loudest. They were the ones who could make a phone call and have a uniform show up. Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo was born January 8, 1946, on a ranch in Bella Vista, on the outskirts of Culiacán, Sinaloa. He studied business, then worked as an agent in Mexico's Federal Judicial Police, and later as a family bodyguard for Sinaloa Governor Leopoldo Sánchez Chelis. That relationship mattered because it meant proximity to power, and power meant protection. With partners Rafael Caro Quintero and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, he helped shape what became known as the Guadalajara Cartel, an organization that, by the 1980s, dominated key routes to the US border. Guadalajara, Jalisco became the kind of headquarters you could defend without looking like an army. Business districts, nice neighborhoods, the perfect place to blend. The timing was perfect. As US interdiction pressure increased in Florida and the Caribbean, Colombian suppliers leaned harder on Mexico as a transit bridge. By the late 1980s, Mexican traffickers increasingly took payment in kind, a cut of the cocaine itself instead of cash, turning transport into ownership. And Felix Gallardo's big innovation was formalizing control of the plaza, a strategic territory and smuggling corridor. In modern border terms, a plaza is ground you control and tax, often positioned directly south of a US port of entry. But every system creates an enemy. In the early 1980s, DEA agent Enrique "Kiki" Camarena was working out of the US consulate's Guadalajara office, building informants and tracking major marijuana fields. In a passage, November 1984, Mexican authorities destroyed a massive plantation in Chihuahua, known as Rancho Buffalo, with helicopters reported in some accounts. A raid later linked in some tellings to a DEA probe sometimes referred to as Operation Godfather. It was later described as worth billions and critically protected by corruption that reached into intelligence and politics. For the traffickers, that raid wasn't just a loss, it was humiliation. And in a world built on fear and favor, humiliation demands an answer. The day Kiki Camarena vanished, it didn't look like a war scene, it looked like routine. February 7th, 1985, Guadalajara, Jalisco. Camarena steps out near the US consulate, heading to meet his wife for lunch. 5 men move in. One identifies himself as Mexican law enforcement. No masks, no sprint, just the calm confidence of people who don't expect consequences. He's forced into a car and disappears into city traffic. Within hours, another man is taken, Alfredo Zavala Avila, a pilot and DEA source who had been flying with Camarena. 2 disappearances, same day, like someone was erasing a case file in real time. Investigators and later accounts tie the abduction to the Guadalajara cartel's top tier, Caro Quintero, Fonseca, and, reportedly, Felix Gallardo himself. The suspected motive was revenge for the Rancho Buffalo raid, and fear of what Camarena's intel network might expose next. Camarena was taken to a house at 881 Lope de Vega, in the Jardins del Bosque neighborhood, later nicknamed the Death House. Over roughly 30 hours, he was interrogated and tortured before being killed. Both his body and Zavala's were found weeks later, wrapped in plastic in Michoacán, near La Angostura. And here's the part that still chills investigators. US officials said they obtained a tape recording that captured parts of the torture, evidence not just of cartel brutality, but of official corruption orbiting the room. Transcripts surfaced in court in the late 1980s and decades later. Reporting said the US Justice Department began turning over sensitive recordings to defense attorneys in the Caro Quintero case. Allegations and speculation have swirled about who else may have been present, but what's proven is the murder itself and what it triggered. Because after Kiki, the rules changed. Washington leaned on Mexico hard. US customs inspections at the border tightened into a crippling slowdown, an economic pressure point aimed straight at the cartel's lifeline. And inside the DEA, the response became Operation Leyenda, one of the agency's largest homicide investigations, built around a simple promise: whoever ordered it, whoever carried it out, and whoever protected it would be hunted. Operation Leyenda didn't end with a press conference. It became a years-long hunt. The US case led to multiple federal trials in Los Angeles, and the pressure on Mexico was relentless. In 1985, Rafael Caro Quintero and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo were arrested. Félix Gallardo, still protected, stayed free a little longer. That shield finally cracked on April 8, 1989, when Mexican authorities arrested Félix Gallardo in Guadalajara. Accounts note the shockwave inside law enforcement, because the arrest dragged corruption into daylight, and major reporting described officials and police being detained in the aftermath. And yet the Godfather left a booby trap behind: the plaza system. In 1989, according to widely cited accounts, he instructed his lawyer to convene top traffickers in Acapulco and divide territories: Tijuana to the Arellano Felix brothers, Juarez to the Carrillo Fuentes organization, and Pacific Coast operations to Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, alongside Ismael El Mayo Zambada, with Hector Palma also linked to that faction. One federation became competing empires, and those borders would be written in blood for decades. Félix Gallardo was convicted and sentenced to decades in prison. As his health failed, he was moved out of Altiplano in 2014. In September 2022, a judge granted him house arrest, though prosecutors challenged the decision, and reporting said the appeal could delay or prevent any transfer. Félix Gallardo didn't invent Mexico's drug trade. He helped formalize and centralize it. The plaza model turned territory into a kind of tax system and corruption into a business cost. When he was arrested in 1989, that blueprint didn't die, it splintered. New bosses inherited the roots, then fought over them, and whole cities became battlegrounds for a map, drawn in quiet meetings. As of the last widely reported update, a Mexican judge granted Félix Gallardo house arrest in September 2022 because of age and failing health, but prosecutors challenged the ruling, and later reporting indicated the move could be delayed or not carried out. But the legacy of 1985 doesn't get to transfer. The murder of Kiki Camarena still echoes in every investigation that followed, and in every family that learned what happens when power believes it will never be punished.